Emotional regulation and resiliency is one of the core skill sets that I work on with the majority of my clients. I mean, so much of what we think about and how we behave is driven from an emotional place. And yet we tend to assume that we're very rational and logical and that we can somehow think our way through our feelings as opposed to actually having to feel our way through them. And what emotional regulation involves is being able to, first of all, identify the very somatic sensations that emotions bring. I mean, again, we tend to assume that we feel with our minds. The reality is, feelings are very physiological. They're something that we experience within the body, and we need to be embodied in order to fully appreciate what it is that's going on. And when it comes to some of the more negative emotions, such as jealousy, our resentment, our fear, our threat, we tend to want to avoid having to deal with them because they're not particularly comfortable feelings. In fact, they can be quite distressing, particularly if we're not accustomed to them. So we tend to treat them like a beach ball, trying to push it under the water, but then they keep bobbing up, keep rearing their ugly heads at inappropriate times. And I suppose the more we try to push them down, the more prominent they become. Whereas the more we can fully identify and clarify what it is that we're feeling and be able to tolerate it, but also recognize the source of the feeling, because again, so much of our emotional responses are the result of past experience and conditioning, and we need to create an awareness of that in order to be able to manage our emotions and to regulate ourselves, as assumed to using external sources to try and ease what is going on internally. And this is where we turn to kind of food and alcohol and drugs and spending money and how we look in order to feel a little bit calmer and a little bit more regulated. And the reality is, we need to just learn to sit with what it is that's going on, no matter whether it be comfortable or uncomfortable, and learn to work our way through it. And the great thing with emotions is they're fleeting. You move through them quite quickly once you sit with them. It's only when you try to repress them that they become very problematic and prevalent. And it's a skill. And unfortunately, very few of us were taught it growing up. You know, a lot of emphasis is based on intellect as opposed to emotional intelligence and emotional agility. And yet, this is the root source of almost everything that we do. So we really need to create a greater awareness of what it is that we're feeling at any given time and be able to work our way through it. And this is very different from positive psychology or from positive thinking. People tend to mix up, I suppose, the emotional side of things with the positivity movement or the mindfulness movement. And both of these movements have applicability to everyone's life. They all have their place. However, sometimes I feel there's quite a damaging narrative out there which basically suggests that you need to quickly turn around any negative into a positive. And that can be really debilitating for somebody who is in the midst of a struggle or who is struggling to identify what it is that they're feeling, or it really makes it more challenging for a person to face up to the fact that they are suffering or that they are in pain, because there's this social paradigm that you need to be a positive in order to be accepted, and you need to put a positive light on everything, and you can't do that prematurely. I mean, there is no set time scale for your actual emotional experience, and I suppose it's learning to regulate will prevent you from going into that place of wallowing and ruminating, because again, that's not all that beneficial either. But again, that's something that I work on with clients. It's learning how to honor your emotional experience but not get stuck in it, not to get too bogged down with what it is or too over identified with it. And then recognize the thoughts that are coming about as a result of that emotion. I mean, the whole cognitive behavioral therapy side of things is definitely significant. However, I do feel that it sometimes misses an important piece of the puzzle, and that is the emotional side of things. So yes, you need to be able to challenge the thoughts, but you first of all need to understand what's driving those thoughts. And that is the emotional side of things. And as I said, oftentimes that means delving into your past in order to fully understand the source or the root cause of why you feel what you feel, and then consequently why you think, and where your constructs and your rules and your values come from. And this is all part of the journey of self awareness. And it is an essential but beautiful journey for anyone. But it can also involve a lot of struggle, a lot of resistance. And that's part and parcel of it. And I think that's why a lot of people avoid it, because, first of all, it doesn't feed into your instant gratification. It's not something that you can apply overnight and all of a sudden be successful at. And it's not guaranteed. You have to be consistent. You have to be honest. You have to be humble. You have to be vulnerable. You have to recognize the areas where you've been holding yourself back. And you also need to move outside of the ego and outside of the self. And a lot of the self-help and the positive psychology side of things very much focus on me. You know, it's all very self-care and self-love and self-healing. And yes, that is important. It is essential that we have a concept of who we are and a better understanding of how to take care of ourselves. However, we are not meant to be a solitary animal. The whole idea behind any of the work that I do is to improve your relational capacity, to improve your ability to show up for the world, you know, as opposed to make your world a better place. It's about making everybody's world a better place. It's about creating connection, creating community, and it's about recognizing as well that you have to find your own path. I think, again, a lot of the self-help culture will very much sell you what they feel will solve all of your woes. And when people are in a bad place or when they're struggling with some aspect of themselves, they tend to be quite vulnerable, you know, and they're looking for a quick fix. And so it's just being very mindful of the fact that what works for one person may not necessarily work for you, and that there's a lot of trial and error involved, and there's a lot of consistency required. I mean, the practices required in order to keep your emotional, mental, and spiritual health in a good place are sometimes mundane, oftentimes boring, and they're not something that give you any great thrill. However, they are very satisfactory and fulfilling if you can manage to move beyond the first few weeks where you have to put these disciplines in place. And I'm just talking about basic things like practicing deep breathing, trying to regulate the bodily experiences, practicing body scans, practicing short little meditations, practicing self-awareness, you know, and appreciation. Now, again, I'm kind of on the fence when it comes to the whole gratitude side of things. I think it's important that we pay attention to what it is in our life that we are grateful for. But that being said, this thing of making up three things every night, it can almost become just a chore for somebody. So again, if it works for you, good and well. If not, that's okay, because as I said, everybody's journey is different. And sometimes when we force ourselves to try and think a different way, like with affirmations or with our gratitude lists, all we're really doing is making ourselves feel worse, because we're lying to ourselves. Again, if our underlying belief is that X, Y, or Z is true, then no matter how many times we repeat X, Y, Z is not true, we don't believe it, you know. And it's recognizing that what our heart believes is what we have to work with, not what we think we can tell our mind. And you know, it's understanding that, it's recognizing what works for you, finding your own individual path, taking what you can from all of the different outlets. There's a lot of help on social media. There's a lot of various counselors, therapists out there that can help you. But again, just something that is in alignment with your values, with what it is that you want to achieve, and that you can actually relate to and resonate with, as opposed to just doing something because you have seen other people be successful at it. So I hope this is helpful, and I'm looking forward to hearing from anybody who is interested in working with me. The website is fundamentals.ie.